Gentlemen, ladies, thank you very much for coming today, and everybody is very welcome to this panel. I'm very briefly going to just introduce the concept of this panel. So first of all, my name's Tim, and I happen to be partially responsible for this show. And we're very thrilled to have this panel, which is effectively hosted by the Plant-Based Treaty, and is really looking at how we can increase, plant-based options in Bristol. Very briefly, I think just to be clear for the audience, we're talking about two movements here. One is vegan and one is plant-based. And this is very much about increasing plant-based options. So we're looking at the benefits of plant-based options for people, for health, for environmental reasons, importantly too for sustainable food production and food sovereignty. And this is really about system change too. So councils and councillors, this is local government, this is institutions. So very different from really sort of promoting veganism for individual change, which, as I'm sure many of you will know, but just to clarify, veganism is a position we take against the willful commodification of all animals. An important aspect is to recognise that it centres animals, and it's really aiming for the total liberation of all animals. So that's animals used for food, for clothing, for entertainment, research, and any use of animals. And although, plant-based diets are aligned with that, plant-based diets really focus on humans and environment, and slightly therefore a different focus. And again, individual change is very different from system change. System change is by consensus, it's by collaboration, and that requires a different set of strategies. So on that note, I just mentioned that Plant-Based Treaty are doing fantastic work all over the world. They're a global organisation, and they've just celebrated their second birthday. And probably in the history of plant-based and animal liberation, this plant-based treaty has probably come up quicker and bigger and more effectively than almost any single campaign ever in this field. So it's an extraordinarily powerful campaign, and we are thrilled to be not only hosting this panel, but I should mention we've been supported by the Plant-Based Treaty too. They sponsored this event, and we're very grateful for that support. And we hope that all of you here will follow up on the Plant-Based Treaty, and specifically to endorse the treaty. So that's the key message to take away today. If you haven't endorsed the Plant-Based Treaty, please do so. Please encourage the people you work with, institutions, businesses, shops, and such like to do the same. Josephine is representing the Plant-Based Treaty today. And Josephine, I'd like you to, first of all, introduce our panel, and then introduce the bit about the Plant-Based Treaty, and then we'll go into a little bit of a panel discussion. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Yeah, our panel is, we have Catherine Cannon, who is from Plant-Based Councils, which is a treaty very similar to Plant-Based Treaty. Plant-Based Councils is also lobbying councils, local councils, for more inclusion of plant-based options for everybody, if preferably by default. And then, Catherine.
Hey. Round of applause there, if you don't mind. Yes, well done.
And then we have Katja Hornchen, who is one of our Labour councillors for Bristol. Yeah. Brislington East. And we have Martin Fodor from the Green Party for Redland. And just briefly, before we start asking our questions to the panel, I just want to say that one of the things about Plant-Based Treaty is it's so accessible to everyone. By going online, you can endorse the Plant-Based Treaty as an individual, as a business, as an organisation, as a councillor, a politician, as a scientist. There's something for everyone. And also, as well as endorsing it yourself, you can also go to the contact your councillor option, where we have a database of all the councillors in the UK. You just have to put in your postcode, your councillors will pop up, you tick the boxes, and you can either send a pre-written letter telling them about the plant-based treaty and asking them to endorse it personally and asking for their councils to endorse it in literally 5 minutes and a couple of clicks of the button. So it's really user-friendly activism where you can take quite a powerful action by engaging with our local government so quickly and so briefly with the homework done. And now we will start with the first question, and I'm going to ask Martin Fodor the first question first. Why do you support the plant-based treaty, and how can plant-based living benefit Bristol?
Right, thanks very much, Josephine. Well, firstly, delighted to be here, and thanks to Tim and the others for making this happen. I go back to the Watershed VegFest many years ago, and lots of workshops I've taken part in. So I think this is an important step forward to endorse the plant-based treaty. And 2 years ago, I spoke at the Bristol launch on College Green in Bristol, where we acknowledged, and some of the things I said there were, it's really important to have international treaties and an international framework for things to change globally. And we need governments to endorse that, so we need to put pressure on governments. Now, at the local level, that means pressing our MPs, members of the government, or members of the opposition. And some of us have done that. And the parallel initiative with councils is because councils can set an example and often do lead the way. And I've tabled motions more than once. In fact, I've sent one in for the next council meeting that I would like there to be a debate. The chance of debate are low because of the business of the council is very time limited. But it's a proposal that the council do a lot within its powers, within its scope, within its initiatives, to set an example in events, in catering, in education, in information. And I can go into that more later on, perhaps. But I think it's important. I've eaten plant-based since 2010 entirely, and cut out meat and fish in the 80s, actually, because of the impact, the global impact of the protein trade, the impact on the environment, the impact on communities, the impact on people who can't afford or have access to land to grow their own food, for instance. So I think there are lots of things we can do personally, but I do believe we need institutions to make the facilities and the services and the arrangements so that it's easy and always easier, simpler, and wide opportunities to eat plant-based. And we can do that, as I say, through events, catering, and so on.
Thank you, Martin. Can I read the question again just to refresh it?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, now this time I'm going to ask you, Katja. So the question again is, how can plant-based living benefit Bristol?
I think plant-based living can benefit Bristol both on a global scale and on a local scale. Globally, if the rest of the world ate as much meat as we do in Bristol and in the UK, we wouldn't have a planet to live on at all. It's just not possible. So from that point of view, it's really important that we take our place and make sure that we also eat a lot more plants and a lot less animals. From a Bristol scale, I was also put in a motion which I'm trying to get through to debate. I'm hoping to work more onto that motion, and as Martin said, it's about the council leading the way, about having more plant options first and meat options if people want them, rather than the other way around, which is the moment you have a meat option and then you can ask for the plant-based option, which I disagree with. The other one is health, actually, of the people, health of the planet and health of the animals, but it's also health of the people. 63% of the British UK average diet is what they call UPS, ultra-processed food. The vast majority of ultra-processed food contains animal products. I know there's vegan food and vegan milk that's ultra-processed, but they are a very small percentage of a supermarket shop. And I'd like to see more healthy eating, more people knowing what they're eating, and more people in charge of what they're eating and not big companies in charge of what they're eating. That's my answer for that one.
Thank you, Katja. And now, Catherine, would you like me to read the question again? Or?
Yes, please.
Okay. The question is, why do you support the plant-based treaty, and how can plant-based living benefit Bristol?
Thank you, Josephine. Yeah, and just to say, I wasn't expecting to be on this panel until about 15 minutes ago, so I will wing it a little bit. I totally support the plant-based treaty. It's a wonderful initiative, and I do really ask everybody here to ensure that you have endorsed the plant-based treaty yourselves and call on all of your local councillors and MPs to also endorse the plant-based treaty. So as Josephine mentioned, I coordinate the Plant-Based Councils campaign, which is very much aligned with the plant-based treaty. It's a campaign that is supported by Animal Rising, and we're predominantly asking councils to show leadership in the urgent shift that we need towards plant-based. As other people have mentioned, currently we consume twice the global average of meat in this country, and it's just not sustainable. So we really need the public sector to lead the way in a shift away from the current levels of animal products. And I think councils have an enormous duty and responsibility to lead the way in that. And so many councillors are doing their absolute best to get this to the forefront of discussion, which is amazing. But it just requires more people sort of nudging their local politicians to ensure that it is prioritised. I think we really are asking in our campaign for three things. Firstly, for the internal catering in all councils to be plant-based. So that's plant-based by default, primarily. And that's really going to have the effect of shifting the cultural perception. So at the moment, meat is generally seen as the centrepiece of every meal, and we need to get away from that. And then secondly, we're asking councils to do what they can to normalise plant-based eating. So that's by putting more plant-based options on the menus of any external catering. So that could be in cafes, in parks, libraries, where councils have control over that, and schools. And then thirdly, can councils promote and encourage people to be more aware of the impacts of their dietary choices through social media, through posts on the website, through any literature that councils distribute. So I think that's it's a really important thing that councils are able to do.
Thank you, Catherine. And it's interesting what you were saying about having plant-based by default, so that's what's the standard, and people would have to actually ask for meat, because Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, who has been a fantastic supporter of the plant-based treaty, has done exactly that in New York. And all the council's food provision is now plant-based by default, although meat is available for people who request it. And now can I just ask Tim, why do you support the plant-based treaty, and how can plant-based living benefit Bristol?
Yes, so I'm not a councillor. What I do recognise is that councillors, need to find consensus, and to that degree, it's really important to find, where we have shared values, and we know about the environment. And Catherine mentioned, this is an emergency. We know we're short of time here, and we really have to pull together and get things done. One of the shared values we have beyond the environment is food sovereignty. And I know that throughout Bristol, there's a real awareness of this, that, some councils, some wards or areas of Bristol have access to really good food, cheap and accessible and healthy. Other areas don't. And that's something that's really, really uncomfortable, I think, for many of us. And I think whatever your party alliance or your other politics, I'm sure that a lot of us would love to see a solution to this discrepancy. Food sovereignty is the solution, where local people grow and produce and own and distribute and ensure that everybody gets a fair bite. And one of the things that's holding back plant-based options is that accessibility. There was a study done a couple of years ago in Brighton University, a pilot study that showed that UK could be producing up to 40% of its current fruit and vegetable production through allotments and through inner city growing and through innovation using things like, vertical farming. You mentioned New York. There's over 500 farms on the top of skyscrapers in New York. And this means the food is grown, it's plant-based, it's right in the heart of the communities that really need it. So beyond a consideration for animals and beyond a consideration for health and beyond a consideration for the environment, there's a very powerful shared value, and that is food sovereignty. And my hope is that, places like Bristol City Council will really come together and recognise the value of subsidies, investments and such like into these areas. And that's what I would love to see coming out of the plant-based treaty, is Bristol really producing its own plant-based options.
Thank you, Tim. Now I'm going to start with Martin again on the next question, which is what sort of projects could you envisage for Bristol to help people eat more plant-based food?
Right, thanks very much. Well, I think there's a vast scope that we could do. We could do in partnership, we could do through supporting community initiatives, and we could do through the council setting an example itself. There's something I did a few years ago that might be a useful example. In 2015, when Bristol was the European Green Capital, I secured a grant for outreach with cookery. And the idea is, if you see how simple it is to make a plant-based meal, and that you can look at the ingredients, find them reasonably readily, common ingredients, cook them, and then eat it, and the project was called Let's All Cook and Eat, then you can try out some food, practice cooking it, and take away the recipe. And that's something I did in 2015 in lots of locations around Bristol. The other sorts of things the council can do is, of course, as Tim said, support allotments and food growing. Park groups have little food growing areas in parks. We could have more fruit and nut trees available. We could definitely support allotmenting and make sure there aren't unused allotments or allotments threatened by development. We can also support the concessions we let in cafes, in parks and locations the council manages should be encouraged to offer plant-based options. And I totally agree with the idea that these should be at the top of the menu. It's not about banning or excluding food. It's saying that the most obvious and quite often the cheapest option at the top of the menu is the plant-based one. There might be below that vegetarian ones and meat or fish-based ones, but they tend to be dearer. And that's something some of the caterers in Bristol have already done through various initiatives promoting food choices and prioritising, the headline being the plant-based options. And what is found is more people then buy them, rather than having to ask specially or find them at the bottom of the menu after they've already sort of mentally picked something they see. Cookery is important. There are families in Bristol with no kitchen facilities. We need to support that there's access to both the food and the cookery facilities. And that's really important for social justice as well. I could go on, but I think that's a few things. And myself and my colleague Carla Denyer were the first two councillors saying, in the good old days when there was actually a budget for councillor catering, please can we have vegan food at the council meetings? I mean, food at council meetings is long since history, but we were the first to, about 9 years ago, asking for that, to say it needs to be available for everyone, from councillors through to the public at events.
Thank you, Martin. And something interesting, going back to Eric Adams, the Mayor of New York, is when he managed to get plant-based options by default, that 70% of people then chose plant-based options. So now I'm going to ask Katja the same question, which is coming up. Okay. What sort of projects could you envisage, Katja, for Bristol to help people eat more plant-based food?
I think one of the most important things is we have to put, as Tim said, we used to have a budget for food and we used to feed people before we had a meeting, and we've cut all of that through austerity and various other budgets. I can recognize why we cut it, but we need to find that food is an essential part of life, not just for our own individuals and families, but also for communities. There are quite a lot of initiatives going on at the moment already. One is Feeding Bristol. There was funding, which I know one of my local community groups, Greater Brislington Together, used. So when they had a local meeting for a planning, and it was actually more to do with planning and events and things that were going to happen and how to spend money in Brislington, they actually cooked healthy food, which was mostly plant-based. There was some animal-based in it, but there was mostly plant-based. So to find that food is in the heart of communities. It brings people together. We share food. It's all part of our society. We've become very individualized in food, I think. I think that might be one of the reasons why it's harder to do. There are some One City food in my local park. There's a growing veg garden. And one of the good news is the local area plan, which is long-winded and they have been long in the planning to come, is coming to council, I believe, in October. I've been sitting on that panel, and I know that they're now going to say that every development over 60 houses has to build a certain square meterage of allotment space or food growing space. It doesn't have to be strictly allotments. It could be beds or whatever they have around it. But they're also trying to tighten it so that they don't put that money somewhere else in the city, so that they do it within walking distance or easy distance where the people are actually living, because we are asking people to live much closer together with less garden space. So that's one of the things. So I'm hoping that we can follow that through, and that local councillors and local people will check on developments and ask, where is this going? How's this going to be done? How's it going to be maintained? Because that's always the big thing. Because growing food is not just something that people can do together and chat and have an allotment and have healthy food. It's also greening the city, which is very important when it comes to the temperatures rising, because anywhere where that's greener keeps the temperatures down. Yeah, that's about it. It's about changing the culture of food, I think.
Thank you, Katja. So, Catherine, what sort of projects can you envisage for Bristol to help people eat more plant-based food?
Thank you. There are so many things that Bristol are doing already which are fabulous, and so many more things that can be done as well. I think for me this is really all about normalising plant-based food, normalising plant-based eating. At the moment very much it's seen as an alternative for those who identify as vegan or vegetarian, and we need to take it out of the alternative and bring it into the mainstream. And I think that's where councils and public organisations really have a role to play there. So I'll give a couple of examples. Manchester City Council, I think it was earlier this year and also last year, they had billboards around the city, which were fantastic, encouraging people to eat more plant-based and to reduce their meat and dairy intake. And obviously we're in a cost of living crisis, which is a huge issue for councils. And I think one thing that Manchester did, which I thought was quite impressive, is they had some really fantastic posts on their social media, which encouraged people to eat more plant-based as a way to do the right thing for the planet, their health, and also to save money. So they had some really fantastic, low-cost, easy-to-cook recipes that were really supporting people through the cost of living crisis. I'll give another example. Oxford City Council have been working with local organisations who are providing community sort of food banks and ensuring that the food that is given out in some of those areas is plant-based. I think really, yeah, like many people have said, it's really about flipping the norm. So at the moment, meat options are very often seen at the top of menus, and I think what we really need to do is just change that around and make sure that the plant-based options, the healthiest options, the most climate-friendly options are the ones that are promoted at the top of menus. I went to my local, I live in a village, small village that has a fair every summer, and I went to the fair a couple of weeks back, and there was a stand there which served some local grass-fed organic meat. On the menu, they had 3 meat options and 5 vegetarian or vegan options. And I thought, well, that's impressive, that's great. But all the vegan and vegetarian options were at the bottom of the menu. And I had a chat with the stallholder, and I said, you know, how's it going? I'm really impressed that you've got so many vegan, vegetarian options on the menu here. And she said, yeah, I mean, I don't eat meat, and I really wish we sold more of them, but we just don't sell them very much. And I said, well, how about flipping the menu around and putting them at the top of the menu? Because at the moment, you've got all the meat options at the top of the menu. And it just hadn't occurred to her to do that. And I think that really says a lot about how we, as a society, think that meat, you know, goes first. And she's now changed the menu around, and she's got the vegan, vegetarian options at the top. And I'm really hoping to see that is going to, you know, make a massive difference to her sales of those options. So I think that's something that we really need to be doing in all areas where we can, is just making sure that those vegan, vegetarian options are promoted and publicised.
Thank you, Catherine. That was really interesting. All of it's very interesting. Okay, Tim, can you tell us about some successful projects that you either support yourself or would like to pinpoint?
Yes, so one of the things I remember was buying this wonderful rocket which has grown on a bit of industrial land in Bristol. So somebody had this sense a few years ago to get hold of some industrial land and turn it into a farm, and they're growing all this rocket, which I'm sure many of you know is one of the most nutritious green plants on the planet. It really is full of goodness, apart from being very tasty. So that was phenomenal, but I don't see it happening anymore. I'm not sure if that's still happening. The land's been developed. There you go. So there's an example of something that's really good. But I think my overriding feeling is that, you know, without wanting to get controversial, I think it's pretty clear that our governments have let us down. And they've reneged on their promises. They say one thing, they do another. And I think a lot of us are incredibly frustrated of the lack of leadership that's coming. But one of the things about the council things is that, you know, this is within our power, and we can really make a difference on a local level and get back some of that power and take responsibility for this. And you know, that to me is a really important thing, and what I'd love to see a bit more of. And again, I'm not a councillor, so I don't know how much of this is possible. But if we saw a change in our institutions, you know, prisons, hospitals, schools, universities, you know, police forces, military, all of these institutions, the more support council can give, the more subsidies, the more education, the more resources we can put. You know, just imagine if, you know, all the hospitals and all the prisons and all the institutions that we have, you know, went plant-based. And there's a big move in the universities. We're seeing the plant-based universities. I think we're seeing probably at least a half a dozen universities now endorse the plant-based treaty. We've seen 5 councils endorse the plant-based treaty. And I'm pretty sure we'll come to this, hopefully next year. Bristol will be endorsing the plant-based treaty. We know why we're not at the moment. We'll come to that, but I'm sure that will change. But I'd just love to see that support for the institutions and try and see if there's some more subsidies. And a further too is when you look at something like oat milk. Now, 5 years ago, you know, the main oat milk in this country was a Tetra Pak containing 3% oats, 97% water, shipped from Sweden. So that really wasn't the solution. And although we want to see people, you know, obviously drinking oat milk, especially leaving the cows alone, you know, why haven't we got an infrastructure in the UK to support a UK oat growing industry? Now, I believe that's changing, and actually the people I'm referring to from Sweden have invested in a factory in Peterborough to the point where I think they now employ 150 people or so, you know, producing UK-grown oat milk. But I've just had a lovely tasty ice cream out there made from the Glebe Farm oat milk. You know, this oat industry is just waiting to be developed. So I don't know whether, you know, again, with planning permission or with subsidies or just that infrastructure we need to see. The demand is there. How can we rise to meet that supply?
Thank you, Tim. That was very interesting. Right, for the last question, Martin, how can the audience get involved in supporting these initiatives, and how do you see working together with the council and MPs to achieve this?
Right, thanks very much. I think we can all get involved in lots of different ways, and we can work in partnership. That's one of the main things we have to bear in mind. It's by collaborating, working together. I would just caution Tim, when you use the word subsidy, the council is cutting budgets because of the government reducing its funding. So initiatives where we work together are very, very possible, but ones where we put money into other organisations are pretty unlikely when as I say, we've cut our own catering for our own kind of members of the council and so on. Budgets are under incredible pressure by tens of millions of pounds at the moment. So the partnership can be very productive. And the procurement the council does, it's still spending substantial amounts. So encouraging the council to make sure when it spends money, it's spending it on things that enable, support and supply plant-based options, food, catering. When it lets concessions, it looks for partners to do that. When it has events, it makes sure the provision includes that. And we can all play our part by, firstly, asking for that catering, expecting it, lobbying councillors. I've had several emails in the last week asking me to support the plant-based treaty and to support the council supporting plant-based initiatives. We can make sure our own spending does support these things, which I've done for many years. We can also put the infrastructure in place. So I took part in an event where all the catering was plant-based last week, and rather than expecting the caterers to buy their own individual litres of oat milk, they worked out oat milk was the lowest impact plant-based equivalent for to replace dairy, and they went to the market and they said, who can supply this in bulk? It'll be more affordable, it'll be more readily available, and it won't put a surcharge on the products where you're replacing something that is already subsidised. And we need to press the government to remove those subsidies on the meat and dairy industry, which are substantial in lots of direct and indirect ways. So we can all play a part, as I say, by collaborating, by setting up our own initiatives, by planning it in our own community events, by asking our local businesses to support it, by asking schools what they're doing in their lessons and their events to make sure there are very visible, as say, high-profile plant-based choices. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. And Katja, now I'm going to ask you the same question, which is... Oh, it seems to be slightly different this time. Okay, never mind. This will be great. What do we... No, which was the one I had for you just now?
Number 3, you might have read
yes.
one.
Oh, never mind. I think we'll go for that one. Sorry, technical hitch. I'm nearly there. Anyway, what the question was is, how do you think the audience can support these initiatives and help the council and our councillors and MPs?
That would be a really good one. One of the reasons is to write to your local councillors, and not just me, but actually people from the rest of the party that's actually representing you in your actual ward, because I think that for the Labour Party, they don't see it necessarily as that being their ward members or their residents as one of the important things that they should be doing. And obviously, I do think it is, specifically with the cost of living crisis. That's one of the first things. The other things are similar things to Martin. We could try and pass a motion to make sure that the council purchases more plant-based things and plant-based foods and less than meat. I mean, we went to Blaise Castle yesterday for a walk, and we were at the cafe, and needless to say, out of the 6 options for lunch, 1 was vegetarian, there was nothing else that was purely plant-based. that shouldn't happen. Blaise Castle is run by the council. So if they're hiring out a cafe there, they should be saying that they should have more plant-based options. Not saying they shouldn't have any meat, but they should have more plant-based options. The other one is schools. That's quite an interesting one, as I'm a DT teacher and often teach food technology. And it's been a slow process even there to get them to put more plant-based recipes in the menu to teach the children how to cook plant-based, even though, in my opinion, they will be eating more plant-based whether they like it or not in the future. Then there's the things when they do their GCSEs, how complicated a recipe has to be, and only up until recently, but despite my asking for it, they would say you can't cook vegetarian menus because they're not complicated, so you can't get the higher scores or the higher marks. So I've only just this term seen a course to help teachers teach vegetarian recipes with more skills attached to them, if that makes sense. Obviously, we wanted to do the kind of simple cooking and recipes and things, and mainly to try and help people take back their ownership of how they eat their food and what they're eating, because we have an absolute, what's the thing, of so many type 2 diabetes, health conditions that are coming from over-processed foods. And people don't seem to even know. Even your bread is full of over-processed food. So it'd be really nice to start helping people, teach people through a plant-based method of better ways of cooking, better ways of choosing your food, and in a more cost-effective way as well. And hopefully I'll do some work with you to get the motion through.
Thank you, Katja. Okay, Catherine, I've got a slightly different version of the question here. What do we need to get Bristol to endorse the plant-based treaty? People are worried about the cost of living crisis, but we must not also forget the climate crisis. How are these two crises connected? And how do we make this a priority for the council? And what can the audience do to help? No pressure.
That was quite long. What can the audience do to help? Get involved, I think. Get engaged with the local democracy in your area. I think that's just so important. Councillors are there to represent us, and they can't do that unless they know what we think. So if everybody in this room goes to the Plant-Based Treaty website and sends an email to their councillors, come to our website, which is plantbasedcouncils.org, get involved with our campaign, write to your local councillors, attend council meetings, submit questions to the council meeting. Just find out what's going on, what your councillors are doing, and ensure that they're doing what you'd like them to be doing. I think that is just, the number one thing. Just really, everybody needs to get involved here. Everybody needs to ensure that our local policymakers, decision makers are really holding the climate and ecological emergencies at the heart of all of their decision making, because that is what needs to be happening now. And just get involved, please.
Thank you, Catherine. Now then, Tim.
Okay, so all our panelists, I think, have mentioned the importance. And Josephine mentioned that Plant-Based Treaty have, an option on their website where you can email your local councillors and tell them that you support this. And this is really important. And we saw this in Edinburgh back in January, February. This is really important, and we're going to have a panel at 3:00 about movement unity and collaborating and coordinating. And back in January, February, Plant-Based Treaty contacted half a dozen leading groups, including Veganuary, Viva, Animal Justice Project, our own organisation, VegFest, and several others, and asked them, all of us, to send out to all of our supporters this request to email the Edinburgh councillors and let them know how much we support the Plant-Based Treaty. And of course we did, and that reach between those 6 firms, of which I'm sure a number of the audience here support, had a very far-reaching effect. And in the space of 48 hours, Edinburgh councillors were just bombarded with this torrent of emails that really did underline how much people supported this. And councillors need this. Councillors have to get elected, and they need to know that the policies they put forward have that support. And the gentleman, Steve, his second name I forget, but Steve in Edinburgh, the councillor who pushed this through, made a point of highlighting how much those emails made a difference. And it really did help reassure those councillors to sort of stick their neck out and endorse that. And of course, then Edinburgh became the first council in the UK, I think. No, second one.
Capital city.
Yeah. Yes. First capital city, because Haywards Heath, Norwich, Oxford, Exeter have also endorsed the treaty. So there was one thing. The second thing I just mentioned is the importance of that collaboration with the group. So if you already support, Viva and animal justice projects and such like, let them know too how much this matters and how much, because we need to encourage people to work together. And the third thing I'll say, which might be a little bit controversial, but I'll be quite honest, we need to get rid of this current government. And we've got an opportunity next year. And we really need to box clever here. We really need to collaborate. We have to get rid of this government. We need a new government, and we need new ideas, and we need accountability. We need some proper, serious adults in the room. And we're lacking that leadership. So we must somehow come together next year and make sure that we have a different government in place come 2025.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, well, thank you, audience, for coming. And I want to thank Catherine Cannon from Plant-Based Councils for participating in this, and also Katja. Oh, questions. Yes, sorry. I'm so sorry. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, right. We'll start with freedom. Do I take a microphone?
We're not going to reach. Can you speak up, sorry?
Okay, so Martin said that Carlo Daniel was involved in the motion, one of the motions that he proposed, I can't remember specifically what it was. She's currently running as a candidate, MP candidate. So in terms of general election, where she stands in Bristol Central, she stands against the current Labour MP, Frank Debonair. The Tories are non-existent now. So in terms of changing the discussion in Westminster, would it be better to replace Fallon Debonair with Carla Daniel, given that she has so loudly kind of promoted the idea of plant-based eating?
Okay, who would like to answer that?
Well, you can't ask Martin and Katja that question. That's not very fair.
Okay, well, shall I ask you, Tim?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to come out. Tangham is my MP, and Carla is, I'm full of respect for both of them, actually. Tangham Debonair came to our event 6 years ago, and, pretty much, I call pretty much plant-based, very much plant-based, and the same with the other Labour MPs, Darren Jones, and of course, Kerry McCarthy, who has been a staunch supporter of VegFest for the last 20-odd years. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, I would love to see either Labour or Green in power. I support both, and I'm fully in favour. So for me, I don't really mind, but, I think the world of both of them, actually, is the truth.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Does anyone else have any comments?
I'm not going to say who you're going to vote for because I'll get into trouble. What I wanted to say was one of the things we do need to look at is Bristol Central is, like you said, Labour and Green, and it's very strongly plant-based, and people are mostly quite progressive. However, even if you move slightly further out of Bristol, I'm thinking Brislington East, which is not that bad, but it's also Tory Labour. And as you get further and further away, that's where you have to change people's minds. To get things done and to change from more plant-based to meat-based, we have to think of those people. And it's not to say that they won't change their mind, they will. They changed their mind 20 years ago when the 5 fruit and vegetable thing came in. I saw that, I was part of that. And they will, but we have to look further than just Bristol Central, if you see what I mean. We need to start spreading out and start going, well, let's see, how can we get people that think that vegans are, I don't know what, don't want to know, but how do we get them to eat more plant-based food? How do I get the kids in South Gloucestershire to even try something that's more plant-based?
Thank you. And yes, Martin would like to say something.
Yeah, whoever you vote for, I hope you'll push them to speak up for plant-based menus, plant-based initiatives, plant-based facilities and supplies. I think I'd go a bit further. I'd say you need people to be willing to support that wherever they are, whether it's an area where it is more common in the public or whether it's less common. You need them to be willing to to actually speak up for it and set an example for it, because there are plenty of politicians who think they have to step back and be behind the curve rather than at the front of the curve, or pushing things further in their negotiations, whether it's with local businesses, other local institutions, local providers. So you want someone who will speak up for it and to make initiatives happen. So expect that of your politicians. Don't expect them to say, oh yeah, I support it, but I can't say anything about it now because it might be unpopular or something. Expect them to say, this is the way it's going. The public are way ahead. The community groups should be ahead, and the institutions have to catch up and put things in place and set an example too.
Thank you, Martin. Catherine, would you like to say anything?
No, not on that.
Okay. All right then. Another question. Lorraine Davies, would you like to ask a question? Lorraine Francis, sorry.
I mean, I'm more. I just want some arts panel, really. I said to Josephine earlier in the week, sorry, my name is Lorraine and I am a Green councillor in the Eastville ward of Bristol. I was having a conversation with Josephine about, one, the role of sort of like BME communities in the journey, and the fact that the panel is all white with respect to everybody. And outside, you can see that there's quite a few stalls where there are African Caribbean people. It's quite mixed out there, which is brilliant to see that. So people of colour, like myself and others, do have plant-based diets and do eat vegetables and do eat meat and do eat a variety of different things in their diets. I'm wondering about how the message is being relayed to communities such as mine when there's real areas where there's lots of poverty. So whether it is areas which Katja mentioned, or whether it's within like Lawrence Hill and other more deprived areas within the city, that sometimes other people have other priorities. I was speaking to the head of gynecology bizarrely yesterday at Southmead Hospital about another issue, and she was saying at the moment she is seeing a rise in teenage pregnancies. Now you might think, what the hell has that got to do with plant-based diet? But actually there are so many different things that's going on in the world at the moment around austerity, around homelessness, around, accessing education, adult education. So there's lots and lots of different issues. So how are we going to get the message that isn't sort of like saying that you're not doing this, people? Because a lot of people are doing it. It's just that you might not know they're doing it. So how does the conversation become more inclusive? This is my question. How does the conversation become more inclusive, and for it not just to be seen in the domain of middle-class people with a good income that can, that can choose to eat alfalfa or something versus buying the cheapest option? And how do we get rid of shops like sorry, there are other shops as well, like Iceland, that are selling overly processed foods in these more impoverished communities? So there is how do you get the message across? It's not that the message is bad, absolutely right, about, the prioritizing plant-based food, but how do you get the message to a more diverse community?
Thank you, Lorraine. That was a really good question. Now, who would like to go first in answering it? Tim? No, Martin.
Okay, yeah. Well, there are lots of sides to this, Lorraine. So, yeah, thanks for reminding us. We have to make sure this is an inclusive movement, as Tim himself said. There are ways different institutions need to play their part, and so I was involved in writing contracts some years ago as an officer in the council, and the Meals on Wheels the catering provided by the council has to reflect all the different dietary choices and preferences of communities. So it needs to show that it's normal to have different types of food from different cultures and different backgrounds. And it's difficult to influence the private sector other than how we spend our money in it. So that's quite tricky. But in terms of the debate, I mean, I was personally disappointed when we passed the climate emergency motion that Carla Denyer brought to the council 5 years ago, almost. The mayor, in answer to a question from the public, implied that he couldn't support plant-based or vegan catering because it was expensive and exclusive. And cooking vegetables isn't. It can be difficult if you haven't got the facilities, but it's not expensive and it's not entirely middle class and it's not exclusive. Lots of cultures, you know, the Ital catering, all the other foods that's available in the city can be very, very suitable and healthy for plant-based eating. So we need to support that and recognise that and not think it's entirely a white or middle class fad or preference. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Martin. Katja, would you like to say anything?
I totally agree with Martin on one side, but one thing I can say, when I was a senior play worker in East London, we were bringing in catering for lunch times because we'd noticed that the children were going to the local chippy, and it was a very mixed cultural area where I was, so there was lots of different, mixture of cultures and things. So instead of me planting my falafels and hummus and salad, I decided we actually employed someone locally as a play worker who knew the food types, and she then cooked healthy meals, which were mainly plant-based from that culture, of the predominant culture of the area, and that worked an absolute treat because the children actually loved her food. Even it was healthy, it was what we wanted. I do take exception with the thing that people say, oh, it's cultural for me to eat meat. It's not really. Most cultures don't actually eat that much meat in history. It's a more modern thing that's happened, I think. Almost everywhere you go, you'll see huge cultural things about eating lots of different vegetables and beans and nuts and whatever it is that's locally in the area, they do eat. And I can't say specifically for any culture because I'm not of that culture, but I do know that does happen. So you go to Vietnam, we ate with the Vietnamese, they eat vegetarian food mostly. But when we get it here, then there's always some meat added to it, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Thank you, Katja.
Just to note, we're nearly out of time, so if we just be pretty brief.
Okay, Catherine, was there anything you want to add?
Well, I feel like I might be repeating a lot of what Martin said anyway, really, but I think, just smashing some of these misconceptions that do exist around the cost of plant-based food. We all know here that plant-based eating is really incredibly cheap if you're eating whole food plant-based that is cooked from scratch with real ingredients. So just getting that message across, which I think, the public sector can do really, really well, and that it is inclusive. It is the most inclusive way to eat. So it's, plant-based food is suitable for all members of every community and religion.
Thank you.
Just to finish, so Lorraine, thanks for asking that question. It's a really important one. And about 7 years ago, VegFest addressed the fact that we were mainly a white cis-het male presenting organisation, and the panels, the speakers and such like. In that period, we have really made an effort to invite people of all marginalised groups. So, we've invited trans men to come and host our panels. We've had queer black activists. We've had lots of, people of Asian heritage. And now we've got, also particularly a lot of women. So now when you look at VegFest, especially up at Olympia, you'll see, I think out of our 10 areas, 9 of them are hosted by women, and half of those are women of the global majority. And so I think the only answer is for representation and to really all people involved in the vegan movement and plant-based movement, especially, white people and these majority people should be having to make not just the effort to invite people, but really make sure that we platform speakers from a very diverse range, because then I think people feel invited and welcome and part of this, and they see, people of the global majority leading these discussions. And I think that's the key. And we've done that work, and I have to say it's been challenging. And, you know, you do put your foot in it occasionally, but we shouldn't be scared of trying to do the right thing. And Lorraine, just to say thank you for raising that, because it's, you know, if we're going to have a genuine global movement, we've got to recognise that, you know, 75% of the world is not white. And actually, it's the white people who are in the minority. And that, you know, unless we take active steps to address that, we will limit that. And I would encourage that. And I'd say the Vegan Society have really made some big strides there. Animal Rising are very inclusive in their policies. And those two organisations, and I would hope to include our own VegFest, are probably the ones to watch to answer that question. Folks, we've overrun. We've got Vanessa at the back, just waiting to come and lead our introduction to plant-based diets, lifestyles sessions. But I'm just going to say, please do give our councillors and participants here a big round of applause. All right. But I'm also going to ask you to give this lady here, Josephine, a very big round of applause. Josephine's an incredibly special person. We love her to bits. She's a key prime mover in the plant-based treatment movement. And Jo, we value you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Thanks.